Now it's time to learn about real pattern pieces, how to cut them out, and how to mark them so that you can make anything. I need my pencil. Here we are. All right, let's just run down the basics. This is a pattern piece. We have different markings on it. Let me explain what they are. Here you see a really long arrow. This is known as the grain. The long arrow indicates where you want your pattern piece to go. So I'm going to align the grain with the grain of my fabric. So what I would do essentially is, I wouldn't do it for this piece because of this fold line you see here, but I'll explain that later. What I would do is just make, let me get my pins. Get this edge and this edge to be on the same piece of fabric. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to pin this in place. And then with my ruler, I'm going to make sure that it's the same exact distance from the base of my fabric as this side. So let's see, 16 and a half, 16 and a half. So that would be on the grain. And I would pin it, and I would cut around it. But we're not quite ready for that yet. Let me explain a few more things. Here we have, this is a notch, and this is a notch. Notice how this one has two triangles, this one has one. That is so when you're sewing, you can easily identify the difference. So what we would do with the notch is mark it. So I would turn my fabric up, or my pattern piece up, and mark the notch. I would translate it to the fabric itself, and I would do the same for up here, like this. And then I would also make sure that once my piece is was cut out, I would go along the back of the fabric, because I technically would be cutting two, and I would mark that side as well. Something else you must know is this pattern piece has this line here. This line means cut on fold. That means instead of placing it anywhere along your fabric and cutting out two, you would align it down here on the bottom and cut along the fold, so your scissors would not cut off this bottom piece. Instead, it would fall open. So if this was opened up, it would be a really cool V shape. You would not have a seam down the center. Most often, however, you don't cut on the fold. You want to just cut it out normally. And your pattern pieces will have something, they'll say cut to somewhere, or the instructions will. And in that case, that means cut to, and you do that naturally because the fabric has been doubled over, as I've keep saying. One more thing you need to keep in mind is when you have all of your pattern pieces, you'll have several, and you will want to line them up in the best way possible so that they all fit on your fabric. So I would need to make sure that the ones that were cut on fold are put down first, since your fold is the most important. However, if I do need more fold to work with, I could always make a fake fold. So just, now I have a fold. Now I have another fold. So you can always refold your fabric in such a way that you would have multiple to work with. But this is the best way to start. When you get your pattern pieces from the store, they actually usually show you a way that you can lay them out so that everything fits. You're gonna see that for yourself when we do our final project. For now, I'm going to show you one more thing. Okay, for this demo, I don't necessarily need to worry about folds. I just want to show you how notches work. So here you'll see two mini pattern pieces that I made. There's nothing particular to make from this. I just wanted to show you. So what you do is, we don't even need to trace them. I'm just going to cut them out real quick. Oops. Oh, and that is why you usually want to pin them down. So please pin down your pattern pieces. And when you're using your fabric scissors or rotary cutter, be careful not to cut the paper because that dulls them. I know I've said that 100 times. And I'm cutting along this line. And before I lift my piece up, actually technically, I would usually do this. Just so my pieces stay together so I don't lose track of what it is. And as I mentioned earlier, we notch it and we notch it. So anytime there's any writing or markings on your pattern piece, you want to translate it to the fabric. Same for this side. Notch it. Notch it. Let me cut this one out all the way. Oop. All right, so we've got two little pieces here. These notches will never show up because they are within the seam allowance. So that seam allowance is, it's kind of along this, it's 1/2 inch seam. So that's where I'm going to be sewing. And the idea here is if I was to sew these together, I'd be like, oh my gosh, because you have to put your right sides together. And this looks really complicated. It just got weird. So what I would do is start with my ends touching, because I know that they touch. And then I would match up the notches. This notch and this notch would match up. So I'm going to put a pin there. And then I would not match up my end piece. So when we sew it, it doesn't seem quite as weird. Let's sew it real quick. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I can't even start here. I'll start right here. Because we used our notches to piece it together, it all made sense again. I have to clip out these curves. You already know how to do this. We talked about it in an earlier tutorial. And now that'll fold nice and open and make the same shape that we started with, a little curve. So that's just a quick tutorial on notches, pattern pieces. Just remember to always translate your markings from the piece to the fabric, and you should be good to go. In pattern pieces, but you might be thinking, well, how do I know if it's my size? So all you have to know is that pattern pieces come with measurements, different measurements. You finally get to use your measuring tape. You are going to need to know the measurements of a few different things based on what you're sewing.